Afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Thanks for hanging out because I know literally it's us or leave. So thank you for choosing us. I'm Tom Caron. I've been the host of Red Sox baseball since 2004 on NESN. I've been in NESN for 24 years now, which is a long time in this industry. So I've seen the rise and the continued rise of Boston sports and the success from the early days, for those of us old enough to remember when they didn't win championships every few months. From 1986 to 2001, not a single championship in this town. And you think about that now. I always use the story when I was at a Patriots parade a couple years ago covering it for NESN. We were on a platform. You get there early and it's breakfast. And you're having a coffee and just waiting as people start to show up. And this family's walking by and this cute little boy says to his dad, "Hey, Dad, let's go stand where we always stand for parades." Wow. You got a usual place to watch parades. That's pretty good. Go tell people in Cleveland you have a usual place for parades. But we're going to talk about the future of sports, which I think is compelling. And we've been had a chance to talk for a little while out back over lunch. And maybe I'll just let you guys sort of have your own opening statements, if you will, a little bit. And John, we'll begin with you because you're closest to me. But when you think about the future of sports, you're involved, obviously, very closely with legalized betting. You're in New Hampshire, where it's going through the process now. How do you see that impacting the future of sports?
Yeah, Tom. So we're in New Hampshire. We've legalized sports betting in June. The governor signed the bill, and we're in the process of implementing that sports betting right now. As you may know, 12 states are legal already for sports betting, so we're seeing the first wave of legal sports betting in the U.S. We have a good sense of what it looks like, and we're in the process of getting ours up and running, hopefully in the next couple of months. What we're seeing is huge pent-up demand for legal sports betting that in states such as New Jersey, Mississippi, Iowa, Indiana, where they've gone live. We've seen numbers in terms of engagement with the betting platforms that is much larger than we had anticipated. The revenues have trailed a little behind that engagement, but certainly looking at it over the next 5 years, as more and more states come on board, we're going to see, I think, more of sports betting sort of coming into the mainstream in coverage of all sports.
And you'll be live by the Super Bowl.
The governor tells me we'll be live by the Super Bowl, so I will either be live by the Super Bowl or I will be out of a job. So
you got to tell us that story real quick. The governor called in to sports radio.
Yeah, so we've been working on sports betting for the last few months, and it's my job. I'm the lawyer with the lottery, so it's my job to make sure the process goes smoothly, legally, and so we've had a bid process that's been ongoing. So if anyone has any experience with bid processes, government bid process is very secretive, and so everything's been on lockdown. And all of a sudden, my boss calls and says, "Did you know the governor is telling everyone we have a contractor and we're going to be up by the Super Bowl?" Governor Sununu had called into WEEI on his drive home last Friday night and promised that he was going to bet on Tom Brady and the over before the end of the season, and that it might be up before December, actually. And I had a minor heart attack, and then after that, we got to work. But we're very confident that we're going to be up and running by the Super Bowl in New Hampshire.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Matt, you do a lot of work on 98.5 The Sports Hub now. You were a former play-by-play voice, minor league baseball up in the Portland Sea Dogs. We talk so much about baseball and attention spans and multi-screen experiences. As someone who loves baseball, we were talking about back, like me, you love the sport. Where does that sport go? How does that sport reconnect with the next generation of fans?
I think baseball in many ways is at a crossroads because you've got a sport that relies so much on its history and relies so much on the way that things used to be. But as we move into 2019, I think baseball has really struggled to adapt to the modern world. So we were talking backstage when we were having lunch, how do you make meaningful change in baseball without actually changing the sport and without driving people like you and me away? So how do you do that? Do you change the TV product? And this is going to be a major question that baseball is going to have to answer, and that I think we in the industry, we're going to have to deal with a lot of changes coming to the sport, hopefully, in the way that it's presented on television, the way that it's presented on radio, the way that we can access the sport, the way that we can access all sports. And, all these TV contracts are going to be up in the next few years, right? NFL, Major League Baseball, what type of changes are we going to see moving forward when it comes to the way that we watch sports, when it comes to the way that we consume sports? And baseball seems to be kind of lagging behind. The NFL has really succeeded, and they've been excellent at making their sport accessible in a million different ways. They're still, very much big believers in putting their product on traditional networks. Fox, CBS, where to find the NFL games, but you can get it on Red Zone, you can get their product streaming, you can get it on satellite, you can get it everywhere. Baseball, I think, is lagging behind that. It's hard to find these postseason games sometimes. So how does baseball make a change when it comes to just the business side of the sport to make it more accessible? There's so many things that we could get into when it comes to the future of baseball, on the field, off the field, business, telecommunications, the way that the sport is presented. There are going to have to be a lot of changes moving forward for baseball to be viable moving into the future. And we were talking about this before, the sport is in danger. I don't know if the sport's dying, but the sport is in danger because it has not been able to move forward and adapt to the 21st century the way that, say, the NFL has. It's why the NFL is the biggest sport in the country right now, one of the many reasons. 20 years ago, baseball was still the biggest sport in the country, and not anymore, because the sport has struggled to move into the 21st century. So how do you do that moving forward? I think that's, in many ways, the biggest question that baseball has to face, both on the field with the on-field product and the business side of the sport as well.
And I think, by the way, next year will be real interesting to watch because they are starting to bring in changes next year.
Right.
The simple change that a pitcher coming into the game now has to face a minimum of 3 batters. That's a huge change. You won't get a lefty coming in, then a righty coming in. Sorry, we're going to lose some commercial time and all of that. But the game will move quicker if that goes well.
Right.
So I think it's clear that the commissioner and the leadership of Major League Baseball is trying to move it in that direction. Mike, to bring you in, it's interesting that today of all days we're here because today the NCAA is, and I know they've been meeting for weeks behind closed doors, but they are publicly saying they are meeting today to talk about this California legislation that says that college athletes will have the right to control their image, their likeness, and marketing themselves. Where does all that go, and what does all this mean to college sports?
Yeah, I think it will go to court probably is the next stop. And the Fair Pay to Play Act is the new California law that goes into effect in 2023. And it's a game changer because currently NCAA athletes are not allowed to license the use of their name, image, and likeness. The Fair Pay to Play Act makes it the law in California that colleges cannot deny their athletes from negotiating the use of their name, image, and likenesses, which would include, for instance, sponsoring a camp or being in a video game, apparel, other products, trading cards, where currently college athletes are forbidden from using their image and giving it up, relinquishing it for compensation. And if they do so, they currently lose their eligibility to play. So that's huge. And then secondly, other states are joining that discussion. Florida, New York, South Carolina, Ohio. In addition, there's a federal proposal from Mark Walker, who's a congressman from North Carolina. That would essentially create what California is trying to do on a federal level. In a lot of ways, that would probably be insulated from the kind of legal scrutiny that the California law is going to face in the months ahead. So I think it will probably wind up in court. Tom, you mentioned that the NCAA is meeting yet again. They enjoy meetings. And we'll see what proposal they come up with. My gut is that it falls short of what the California law would compel. And other states are even asking for more. New York, for instance, has a bill that would require colleges to set aside about 15% of revenue in a separate fund that would go towards athletes for different purposes. So this is really changing the way college sports have been. And a lot of people say, well, if they get their scholarship, what are they complaining about? This isn't about that. This is about the school's not paying you anything. It's you're able to go out and do a separate deal with a network, with an apparel company, even with something as modest as a summer camp, where currently they're not able to get anything for that. So it's a new era for college sports.
A summer camp for somebody on the swimming and diving team could be a life-changing thing. Zion Williamson wants to do his own EA Sports video game. That's a whole different thing, right? That's sort of the problem here, is the two ends of the spectrum.
It's a great point, Tom, because it's the swimmer that marketability is at its peak moment in college, right? He or she isn't going to go on and play in the pro swimming league. There isn't one. Zion Williamson, yeah, he's going to go on and play in the NBA, and he's going to sign with Nike, and life is fine, whether he gets paid at Duke or not. But it's the swimmer, it's the volleyball player, it's the javelin thrower, who admittedly may not make millions of dollars in endorsements, but they're not making anything right now through the use of their name, image, and likeness. And that California law would ensure that they can hire an agent as well. So they would have expert representation. And just yesterday, the NFLPA announced that it would like to, in some form or another, act as a trade association for college athletes if this legislation goes into effect. College athletes are not employees, so they can't unionize, but a trade association would be a very similar vehicle getting to the same end.
Kind of interesting that it's the NFLPA. That's the one jumping in, because you could argue they don't really protect their players in the NFL right now very well.
I've struggled a little bit at the negotiating table in recent years, or forever, essentially.
John, when we talk about betting, and I think really what's happening right now in sports, probably the biggest change is betting coming in, right? You see more of it on TV, you see lines on TV, you see mainstream TV shows bringing in lines over the course. How will that change how we consume sports, how we watch sports on TV?
So I think right now what you're seeing the first wave of this is ESPN News has become much more of a betting-friendly channel. They're running the lines on that channel all the time, even when they're not doing centralized gambling programming. Even when they put their afternoon debate shows on. So you're seeing that with Fox Sports, you're seeing that with ESPN. I think you're going to see more and more of the gambling content come into the mainstream broadcast. I know there's a lot of discussion about doing alternate broadcasts over time, and potentially doing an alternate broadcast that's just gambling focused. Because although there's a substantial subset of the sports betting, the sports fan population that's a sports bettor, it's not everyone. And so there is some discussion of whether, in addition to integrating some of that into the mainstream, whether there will be in the future streams of broadcasts that are focused exclusively on the betting angle of games.
With the technology now, and we were talking about this out back, and maybe you guys can all jump in a little. I mean, we're not far. I mean, we're there now technology-wise, where a sport like baseball, you could bet certainly on every at-bat, the outcome of this at-bat, and maybe ultimately the outcome of the next pitch.
Yep, absolutely. So I mean, at this point, the technology on a mobile betting platform is good enough to do betting on a pitch-by-pitch basis, or certainly at least an at-bat by at-bat basis. And if you look at the most mature market in terms of sports betting, that's Europe. It's been legal for quite some time. That's what you're seeing is the majority of bets are actually in-game bets. Their action and engagement while the game is going on through a second screen, or in some rare cases, the stream is actually being put on the sports platform itself. So you can bet right on the screen while you're watching a tennis match or a soccer match or things like that.
I don't think it can be said enough how much sports gambling is going to change the way that we consume sports, simply as fans, as viewers, as listeners, whether you bet on sports or not. Because with the implementation of sports wagering, essentially across the country now, and as states will certainly catch up, this is where we're headed in the future. Whether or not you gamble on sports, you're going to start seeing these on broadcasts. You're going to start seeing sports radio specific gambling shows. You're going to start seeing this maybe even on play-by-play broadcasts in the future. Who knows? I mean, when I first started the Sports Hub, I'll never forget this. They had a weekend picks segment or whatever, and they put the thing in front of me and it said Texans +7, and I said, "What's that?" I don't know. I've never placed a bet on sports in my life. I don't necessarily know if I will, but I have found that over the 6 years that I've been there, and particularly in the last year since sports gambling, since the Supreme Court case, we're talking about it more and more, and people want more content. We have twice a day, just basically a news update on all the lines coming out of Las Vegas. This is what a certain population, a certain segment of sports fans want, and we're having to tailor our content towards them. And whether or not you gamble on sports, and again, I speak from a non-gambler, it's becoming more and more a part of what I do in my job. Just saying, okay, we'll talk a little bit about the line here. Well, the Patriots are going to win this weekend, but do they cover? And I don't, say that from a gambling perspective. I say that from a talk content perspective, because there is such a demand out there for it. We're big on podcasts right now at the Sports Hub, like just about everybody is. our most listened to podcast is a sports gambling podcast. Outside of the replays of Felger and Maz or the shows that you listen to daily, our most listened to, our most downloaded original podcast is sports gambling, which tells you exactly where we're going into the future. I think you're going to see that show eventually become a regular over-the-air show. You're just going to get more and more sports gambling content, whether you're interested in it or not.
It's interesting going on that. 13 states, I believe, is the current number of states that have legalized sports betting. And clearly there's a lot of momentum to see it pass. But, John, you mentioned that the spot betting, right? The betting on a play. I wonder if I remember in the early 90s, the federal ban on sports betting was premised on the idea that games could be thrown, right? This is in the aftermath of Pete Rose. Well, nobody really talks about that anymore, but I wonder if we're betting on individual plays, will that be a moment where it's so hard to know if somebody threw a play, right? Because people make mistakes regardless. And if a scandal happens, I would suspect it's going to be in that kind of context.
Yeah, and I think that's something that obviously we're really concerned about, and I think all the states that have legalized gambling are concerned about. I think we're entering into a new era in terms of having mobile wagering means that you have all of the bet information available to you, to the regulators in real time, so we can see odd jumps in behavior. But when you get down to a play-by-play type of betting, yeah, absolutely. That's only going to be offered with very low stakes, so that it will not be worth it to the relief pitcher to sail a pitch high, so you walk somebody to cash in on a bet. So the regulators are certainly familiar with that. There have been growing pains in Europe in terms of having integrity concerns in some of the low-level sports in soccer. And
tennis has been
tennis
a
is a
big
huge
yeah.
one. The concerns in the major league sports are not nearly as much because the players are so well compensated. And really the data that we have individually as states, and then we are all feeding into monitoring networks. So we can see suspicious betting activity really soon. So yeah, it's a concern, absolutely. I think with regard to this play-by-play, it's going to be a low-stakes betting. But it's something that we have to continuously keep an eye on, and especially as we go down to looking at betting at low-level sports as well.
Where I think it gets interesting now is that there's so much untapped revenue coming in from all of this, and how a radio station or a TV network can cash in. It's pretty obvious, right? We have more betting programming than ever before. You just said you do as well. What about the teams? What about the leagues? How do they get into this? How do they stake their claim? How do they avoid blocking blocking the state out, right? But there's going to be some sort of paradigm set up here where leagues and teams get involved.
Yep. So the NBA has been at the forefront of this, and they've partnered with Major League Baseball and the PGA Tour. And initially, even before the overturn of PASPA really let loose this new era, they had proposed legalizing betting and taking 1% off of every dollar bet. Now, if
Integrity fee.
For an integrity fee, the erstwhile integrity fee, it's no longer considered the integrity fee. Now it's a royalty fee. So 1% sounds like a really fair offer, but the issue is in sports betting, it is a very, very low margin product. Basically, the house will hold about 5% of all the dollars bet, and so giving up 20% of your profits to the league was not really going to be something that was going to go in most places, and it hasn't. They've brought that down to 0.25. There's some states where they're getting 0.25% on each bet. Illinois is one, I know for sure, and as states roll out, they will try to be profit participants. But to our point in New Hampshire, we're not paying an integrity fee or a licensing fee to the leagues. We think that the leagues get that in engagement. I mean, they're going to get that in terms of your viewership, your listenership, the increase in sponsorships. As a result of that, obviously, that drives rights fees up. And just the overall player engagement that we've been talking about, something that's missing in baseball and present in other sports. We think the leagues benefit from that alone without getting a direct profit participation.
So, looking particularly at baseball, I think, a lot of people in the gambling community, and just based on what they're telling me, again, I'm not a gambler, they say that baseball isn't as big a gambling sport as, say, football. But if you have live play-by-play gambling in baseball, does that fit the mold for the sport where you can bet on an individual pitch, you can bet on an individual moment? Does that fit the flow of baseball? So, does something like this help baseball grow into the future? It's an interesting question. I don't know if I have the answer to that, but it's an interesting question.
So I think the answer is hopeful.
It can't hurt, right?
Right, it can't hurt. And I think what we see in our products in general is that offering a flat product, we sell lottery tickets,
right,
which is, we sell lottery tickets. If we look at our demos, lottery tickets, just selling a scratch card to somebody, that's not appealing to a 25-year-old. It isn't. So those people have grown up playing video games. They've grown up engaged in fantasy sports. They want to be a part of the participation of the sport. They want to be a part of what the product that they're engaged in. And so we do think that betting has that potential to do that and do it on a micro level for something like baseball.
Right, because to your point, it's not just one moment that you're invested in. It's the next moment and the next moment and the next moment.
Exactly.
UNH, you have an online certificate program now,
That's
right?
right,
Is it
thank
sports wagering and integrity?
We do. We have an online program. It's a professional certificate. It's fully online, and it's in sports wagering and integrity. We have some industry leaders, including John's boss, who's one of the teachers in it. And it's a program that's designed to introduce individuals to the basics of sports betting law and regulation, and also provide more detailed analysis as well, including the topics we've just talked about. Integrity issues, issues of monitoring, also issues of data. Tom, you mentioned the league's stake, their ability to control official data, which sparks some legal questions about what is official data versus unofficial data, who owns numbers, right? These sort of interesting questions about intellectual property. And that program goes into it, and we've had a great response from the community. We've had people who are in the gaming industry, but also in other businesses that just want to learn more about it.
You kind of saw that with the explosion of fantasy a few years back, right? Didn't the NFL at one point try to protect their numbers and keep it from the fantasy sites before realizing that they were just going to get overrun?
It's exactly right. It's interesting, the NFL has just shifted on everything, right? They were categorically opposed to sports betting, more than any other league. Even the NBA, Adam Silver had written in an op-ed in the New York Times saying, I'm okay with sports betting if there's a federal law. I don't want the state-by-state sort of patchwork approach where every state has their own system. There's inconsistency. It's hard to do business if every state does their own thing. Even the NBA commissioner was at least okay with the concept of legalizing sports betting. The NFL has just been really vehemently against it. Now they've just shifted. But it makes sense, right? I mean, you might as well, the war's over. You've lost. Right. Now, with this new landscape, you might as well embrace it.
Which brings us back to our teams, which is why we're here. We want to talk about our teams. And certainly the Patriots have given you plenty of material.
The Patriots over
First of
here-
all,
no.
were they deflated?
No.
Okay.
The answer to the, I don't want to give away the end of the movie, but no, they did not deflate football. Science literally debunks the idea that they deflate, even if you hate the Patriots. And I know this because I taught a course at UNH called Deflategate. And before I taught it, a professor from MIT named John Leonard emailed me. He said, hey, I'd love to talk to your students. I hate the Patriots. This is what he said. I'm a diehard Eagles fan, but they've been railroaded. What the NFL is claiming literally doesn't make sense. They have not taken into consideration the role of temperature in air pressure. And he came up and did 157 PowerPoint slides. This is John Leonard. He then became a featured person in the Wells Report in Context and other materials. So yeah, Tom, the Patriots have given me some work over the years, and anybody who gives me work, I guess I'm a fan of.
Yeah, so if you weren't a fan of the Patriots before.
I will. I'm going to call in.
Please,
I'll
please
call
do.
in. I'll
Thank
say
you.
that,
It is remarkable, though. I talked about all the success these teams have had here, going back to the 2001 Patriots, the 2002 Super Bowl. And it's amazing when we talk about the future of sports. In a lot of ways, it's almost hard to talk about change in sports in Boston because things are so successful in Boston, right? Why would you want to change anything, right? I mean, but it's coming. I mean, all this is happening.
Think about 2 days ago. It was the 15th anniversary of the Red Sox winning the 2004 World Series. Think about how much our world has changed since. Now, the Patriots had won 2 titles before that, but think about the success that we have seen in Boston. since then. You know, I mean, the whole part of being a Boston sports fan was essentially tied in to that experience of being a Red Sox fan. And sure, the Celtics were great for years, but Boston was a loser sports town because of the Red Sox and because that's who we most identified with. That was our experience. It's been such a seismic shift, really, since that day 15 years and 2 days ago. It's almost like we're living in an alternate reality.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, I was saying to you guys before, I mean, there's been 4 GMs.
Right.
And 4 different championships for the Red Sox. If you'd have told my father 30 years ago that someone won a World Series, that GM will have a job for life. Instead, you have a job for about 12 months, the way it works out.
Or 24 if you're lucky.
If you're lucky. It is amazing how different it all is. At the local level, when we talk about wagering, when we talk about that, what about in the arena, in the stadium? Where does that all bring us?
So, you know, that's interesting. It's something that we're seeing develop right before our eyes. So what's interesting is a lot of the legislation that is going state by state does account for having a sports book in the arena itself. I know
They have that in Vegas, right?
They do have that in Vegas, and they're going to have it at the Washington Arena, I think the Capital One Center, where the Wizards and Caps play. It's going to be a part of the product. It's going to be a part of the experience of being in the stadium. They're going to have it's going to be a very high-end sports book. I don't know that I believe, you know, the ownership here in terms of the Patriots and the Red Sox and the Bruins. And Celtics are very forward-looking, so I would not be surprised when Massachusetts gets on board to see something like that where you can place a bet at Fenway or at TD Garden. And I think certainly in New York, they're talking about a Yankee Stadium. They're talking about it at Madison Square Garden. These are the most venerated arenas in each of their sports. And so I think once that line is crossed, it's going to be probably more the norm than the exception.
It's remarkable when you think about that, right? How far that is. We talk about living in an alternate reality, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were joking. Pete Rose was ahead of his time. I mean, had he just done this now, we'd have been like, that's fine.
You could just ran to the sports book, and you didn't need to call
with the spikes on.
Yeah.
And think about it, we're only just a little over a decade removed from the Donaghy scandal in the NBA. And,
right.
and think about that potentially happening in this day and age now, and that gets into your point about the regulation and how this is going to be a huge part of it. Not only is it going to change just the regular fan experience, again, whether it's something you're interested in or not, you're going to be inundated with sports gambling, sports betting, sports, anything, information as you're consuming this product, whatever product you consume, and however you do, you're going to be inundated with that. But from a regulation standpoint, I can't even begin to imagine, how big this must be.
Yeah, so Matt, it's interesting you say that because I think a few weeks ago there was the Lions, I think, played the Packers on Monday night, and they got just absolutely hosed on 2
I work with
calls.
a big Lions fan. He's very much in the conspiracy that that there was something fishy going on.
Exactly. My boss came in and said, "Thank God this isn't next year because I don't want to hear from all the aggrieved bettors." But yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that it's going to be just like instant replay. Sports betting is going to become part of. It's going to become part of the mix of every game and every call and controversy and good parts and bad parts and all those sorts of things. So it is going to be a component that has to be covered as equal with all the other things that are going on in the game.
Yeah, and think about it. Let's just say 10 years ago, you would almost never hear anything about betting on a broadcast. Maybe Al Michaels would drop something. Oh, that's kind of an important touchdown because. But other than that, you wouldn't hear about now. I guarantee you, someday you're going to see a ticker, below. I mean, that's where we're headed. It's going to be a part of
a ticker on the next play. You know what I mean? It's 2 outs, 2 men on. Yep. Here's the situation.
Right, exactly. You can bet on this. You can bet it's going to be out there.
And we're seeing more instant replay now with the NBA, right? With the coaches challenge, where the games are going to be slower, perhaps, with this focus on accuracy, and maybe in part because bettors want that accuracy. And also fans are more litigious, you could say. There was a lawsuit over the NFC Championship game, right? The no call on pass interference. That lasted in court for months, and lawsuits don't go away
probably led
quickly.
to how they handle replays for interference now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's remarkable where replay has gone, right? And for all of us in television, I mean, we talk about trying to speed up these games. even as we are adding more and more stoppages in play. In college hockey, I do some college hockey play-by-play, they can now go back to look if there was contact with the head on a play that wasn't called a penalty. On the next stop, and we had one the other day where the coach asked the ref to go look, and we had about a 5-minute delay. And of course, we had no idea what they were looking at.
Right.
It wasn't a goal. I don't know what they're looking at. But that's where they sort of intersect, right? When you're talking about the wagering. So what might now seem like an innocuous part of a blowout game could have a lot of money riding on it as they look at that replay.
Right, and how does this change how you watch as a fan? Is this more likely to get you interested? Is this more likely to turn you away? I mean, we spent, half of our lunch talking about pace of play in baseball, but if the NFL starts playing 4.5-hour games because we're looking at everything to appease the bettors.
And they're getting closer.
And they're getting
NFL games have slowed down significantly.
And I'll tell you what, if you're playing a 4.5-hour game in any sport, it doesn't matter, that's going to hurt the product. And is that going to drive people away? Is this one of the potential negative impacts of something like sports wagering?
What about esports? Where does that come into all this? Especially, are we going to be all sitting around betting on a Fortnite tournament? Is that where we're heading?
Well, I think I'm too old for esports, but when you look at any of the numbers, it's just amazing how popular it is. I always have to check twice of what the numbers are on a viewership. But something like Twitch, if people are familiar with what Twitch is and the viewership numbers on Twitch, esports is a huge piece of, I think, millennial culture, really, at this point in time. And I think there's a very good chance in 10 years from now, if you're having this panel, esports is one of the first things that you're mentioning. I think sports betting, they have had sports betting on esports. I think it's something that has been a little bit slow in the U.S. to develop, but I think absolutely that's something that we're going to be looking at over the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, and when you talk, when you talk about Twitch, we actually take our morning show, and Twitch, for those who might not be familiar, is essentially a streaming platform that is predominantly used to watch people play video games, which, I don't know, even to me as a millennial is still a little crazy to me. But we actually take our morning show, which was on television, simulcast on television, and now instead we stream it on Twitch. And that was a choice that we made. Our midday show went onto television. Our morning show is being streamed, all over the world, wherever, on Twitch. And I think you're going to see, particularly us at the Sports Hub, we're going to continue to diversify our content. And just across the sports spectrum, I mean, I think you're going to see more streaming options, more options like Twitch. You're going to start seeing content put there. I mean, I could see a day and age where your baseball, the Red Sox or the NFL or whatever, you could somehow stream it on Twitch too. And that gets into the future of TV contracts and all of that. And that's a huge discussion moving forward. But that's just another place where you can get content.
Well, baseball moved games to YouTube this year, right? You have the Sunday morning football games are on Yahoo now?
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know.
At least in the past,
they were on Twitter for a little while, weren't they? Or,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the video games people are going to age out. Like, we grew up with Atari, Nintendo, and then we did other stuff, right? And these games are so realistic now that I'm not sure that the 12-year-old kid playing a game isn't still going to be playing at 32 or 42 or 52. And if that's the case, that consumer is a lifetime consumer of esports, right? In some form or another. Maybe
it's a great point because I think we dismiss it quickly as a kid's thing. Because we grew out of it.
Right.
We grew out of it, but I don't know if they will.
I finished 18th in Fortnite once. Very proud of that. My son said, "Get out of here."
Made it that long. That's impressive.
I just hid.
I tried
If
once.
you hide long enough, everybody kills each other.
I tried once. They killed me in like 2 minutes. I'm like, I'm done with this.
You find a good place to hide. It's just like life. If you can get out of the way and hide, you'll be fine. But that's an interesting point, that they will grow and continue, because I think it is, again, I think it's a mistake if we just dismiss this out of hand. And it'll be interesting. We've already seen, I'm having a brain freeze, the owner of the Caps and Wizards.
Ted Leonsis.
Ted Leonsis, very involved in esports.
Well,
he got in early.
Crafts.
The Crafts have gotten in. A lot of the Overwatch League is predominantly run by team owners and leagues.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at where the league owners, those guys are really, really smart. They've started in The NBA started an NBA 2K league. That's an esport league. The NFL, there's a lot of NFL owners that are partners in esport leagues. It's absolutely not going away. The numbers are sort of undeniable. And it just goes to sort of our initial discussion of baseball and how do you get younger people engaged in it, and our sort of the underlying theme of interactivity with the product. Twitch is all of that.
Yes.
And somebody once explained it to me. It's like, you know, if you could watch LeBron shooting during a game and you could ask him questions about what he's doing and why he's taking the shot that he's taking and why is he driving now instead of passing to the corner, that's the kind of interaction that people have with people playing video games on Twitch. And that is hugely, it's a huge benefit to somebody who's used to not just watching a flat product, but engaging in a product, either a video game or those types of things. So I would expect a lot of that to sort of filter into sports in the future.
The interactivity of sports is huge, and it's always been there. And I guess one of the first ways we could talk about that would be sports radio, which of course started to become big in the '90s. But now look at, does anybody watch a game anymore without checking Twitter or something? Like Twitter is one giant watch party for NFL games, for everything. So you have Twitch, you can comment, you can interact. How do you make sports accessible? How do you make them interactive? Because if they're not interactive, people don't want to, they want that shared experience. And if it's not interactive, they don't want a part of it.
Well, that's where it gets interesting with the
Right.
athletes themselves,
Sure.
right? We love the athletes who make themselves accessible to fans, interactive with fans, but then we roll our eyes at Antonio Brown, right? That's the
Right.
fine line, right? And we're just getting to that point now, where essentially we've got a generation of athletes who all grew up on social media. It used to be easy to say, as Bill Belichick would say, put snap face away or whatever, But now they're all growing up, right? My kids use it, all our kids use it. So these athletes are using it and interacting with fans more than ever before.
Look at Tom Brady. And Brady is obviously an old, he's 42, we all know that. It's only mentioned a million times, but even Brady has gotten into that. And it took him a while. It's really only been in the last few years that you've seen Brady building his brand on social media. It's as big a part of being a modern day athlete as playing the sports, to be totally honest. It's almost as big a part.
The other part that always strikes me is how we consume highlights, right? We're talking about live games by and large, but Twitch and other places are, my son won't watch a game, but he'll always know what happened before. Hey, did you see? Of course I did.
Yeah.
I saw it in 9 different places by the time you texted me. That's, to me, an interesting world going forward as well. You talked about baseball being a little behind others in how they're streaming. Baseball has protected its rights, its video rights, right? Other sports have been much more upfront about letting their highlights go out on social media.
So I was going to say, this is 2019. People want what they want. They want to get it. They want to get it instantly, and they want to have access to it in seven different ways.
And people will take a video on their phone of something on a TV screen and they'll put it on Twitter, right? So
Yep.
it's almost impossible to own the content in a way that's going to exclude the fan that wants to replicate it and put it on Twitter. And I guess that makes money for Twitter, right?
Right.
And I want to circle back to what we were talking about earlier, just with the states and what you said before about how the NBA originally wanted it federal. Does the federal government get involved, or has this gone too far with the individual states now?
I don't think they do. I think gambling has really always been a local concern. And so if you think about it, Utah does not have lottery because it's offensive to their sensibilities. And I think that makes sense there. Massachusetts makes $1 billion a year off of lottery. In New Hampshire, we love our lottery, thankfully, for me and for my employment status. But we do not have casinos. So the sensibility of what can be allowed in every particular place, it's very specific to that locality. And I think the federal government getting engaged in that state by state, trying to blanket regulate this is just not going to work for a lot of reasons. And I think generally the governors will push back on any type of sort of federal regulation that's very specific. There may be some general overview of you have to do this, this, and this, but I think for the most part, it's going to be legalized on a state-by-state basis, and I think the rules will be set on a state-by-state basis.
One thing we didn't touch on that I wanted to touch on real quickly is the whole kerfuffle with China. So we talk about expanding into new markets, expanding revenue streams, creating new revenue streams. And yet more and more we see moments like that where a league, I mean, there's a lot of money coming out of China, and that blew up in their face. Is that going to happen more to leagues?
It could. You know, the NBA was so open about its embrace of China for a long time, and signing multi-billion-dollar contracts with networks there, with internet service providers and others, apparel companies. Also, NBA players have signed sneaker deals with Chinese sneaker companies. So it's the league and it's also the players that are now kind of, they got ahead of the horse a bit. You know, they're really there, and it's hard to walk back. And I think that, you know, the NBA, I mean, obviously hindsight's 2020, right? They probably should have had a sense when the protests in Hong Kong began that it's possible that somebody connected to the NBA could opine. Certainly the NBA has embraced political commentary in other contexts, and it's not inconsistent that somebody might want to also opine on what's happening in Hong Kong. I don't think they certainly foresaw that a tweet, a fairly innocuous tweet by Daryl Morey, it wasn't this sort of like confrontational tweet. It was one that replicated other tweets about Hong Kong, and obviously the impact of that was something that spiraled out of control. And also, I think, you know, for China and other countries that think they're doing business with a business, they're really not, right? There's no voice of the NBA. LeBron says X, Daryl Morey says Y, Adam Silver says R. I mean, so there is
And then later says Z.
And then later says, right.
Yeah.
And that's part of doing business with an American sports league, is that we allow people to be outspoken and offer views, and some avail themselves of that right. And I think that it's very difficult to have, if you're a sports league, to really craft one voice.
It's interesting too, because you remember a couple of years ago, baseball was rushing into Cuba. Cuba was opening it up.
Right.
It was going to, and now Cuba's not as open as it was, and so you've got to be careful in other countries. Just a couple minutes left. These people have waited, and thank you again for not hitting the road. So I'll wrap it up by sort of giving each the closing comments. We talk about the future of sports. To you and you and you, what's the most pressing thing that we are looking at when we talk about the future of sports in New England and America?
So appealing to youth. I see it with my kids. They're not going to sit down and watch a full game, and you have to find a way to engage younger people in different ways, either through Twitter, through Twitch, through highlight packages, those types of things. I think that's probably the most pressing issue, and obviously sports wagering may, when they become of age, play a role in that. But I think that's the most pressing issue that I would be concerned about if I were in the sports media industry or the sports industry. We've got to appeal to the kids who are not going to sit there and watch a game like we did, you know, in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, and you know, sticking with baseball, which is my real passion, appealing to youth is critical, because if you look at the numbers, the baseball fan is getting older by, you know, with each passing year, kind of gets 1 year older, as we were talking about a little bit earlier. So how do you, you know, change the game without really changing it? How do you make it quicker? How do you make it more accessible? For example, I was driving around the other night in my car. I couldn't find World Series Game 5 on my radio. I could not find it. It was nowhere to be found. Maybe I was just a little too far from Boston. I don't know. So how do you make it accessible, and how do you make it a desirable product in a world where there's so much that, you know, we have at our fingertips instantly? We can decide, you know, I'm going to watch this. I'm going to, you know, engulf myself in that. How do you make your sport a desirable product? And I think baseball has really struggled to do that. I would say over the last 20 years, pace of play and accessibility probably being the two biggest reasons why. So baseball really needs to address that, and fast.
I mean, those are all great points. I would just add that I think seeing the landscape of the youth athlete changing, whether it's he or she can sign an endorsement deal, hire an agent, be in a video game, or play esports and make money from that. I think sort of how we view youth sports is going to change pretty radically. We grew up playing Little League and softball or wiffle ball and things like that, but it's changed. And young athletes can now monetize themselves, or will be able to monetize themselves in ways that they haven't before. And how will businesses take advantage of that? How will they negotiate with that? Some interesting issues ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. My son last year was playing soccer at Bridgeton Academy Postgrad School, and they played, I think it was Brewster Academy, had one of the top point guard prospects, and he was a high school kid. I think he had 1.9 million followers on Instagram already, just from his highlight reel. So is he monetizing that? Maybe not yet, but he's already got the vehicle to do it. And I think that's going to be interesting as we watch where this all goes. And we'll let you all go. So we thank you for, I hope this was worth waiting for. Interesting times, to say the least. And I'll say this last thing. One thing I've learned covering all these sports for 24 years in Boston, the best marketing strategy is still winning. Okay, you want people to watch, win. Okay, our ratings go up when they win, they go down when they lose. So whatever you can do, try to have a winning team on your network. Thanks.